The purpose of this resource is to provide you with a framework that you can use to think about how your assessments hold up in our new educational environment, in which generative artificial intelligence exists. Also, if you determine that your assessment does need revision, we'll provide some things to think about while you go about that process. To begin, I want to acknowledge and express my gratitude to Dr. Cory Scurr, whose work this resource relies on heavily. He presented this framework in a talk hosted by the International Center for Academic Integrity on May 27, 2026. I attended this talk and have been asked to repackage it for our Fanshawe audience. Thank you, Dr. Scurr. We've traditionally measured our learners' achievement of learning outcomes by having them produce an artifact of some kind, whether that be an essay, a presentation, a proposal, or something of that variety. There was once a time not that long ago when this was appropriate and would have been evidence of the learner having gone through a series of stages such as planning, research, synthesis, and development. Unfortunately, in our new reality, we can no longer assume that the presentation of an artifact is evidence that the learner has gone through these stages. With that in mind, we need to rethink what we ask our learners to do. So, if we're going to make a revision to assessments, what do we do? With that in mind, Dr. Scurr presented two categories of revisions: discursive and structural. Discursive change. Simply, a discursive change is any change that we make to an assessment that requires compliance from our students. A couple of examples of discursive changes are: categorize. This is represented by the provision of levels of permissibility. Our own framework here at Fanshawe that includes limited, partial, or full AI is a perfect example of this. We provide our students with an understanding of what AI use is permitted and what is not. Declarative. The declarative approach is the idea that we ask that our students disclose what AI use they've employed during the completion of an assignment. Regardless of the approach associated with a discursive change, we are presenting a statement to our students and asking them to comply. We say, when completing an assignment, please do this, and we hope that students will honor our request. Discursive change is important for establishing guardrails and clarity for our students about what is and is not permissible. But importantly, it's not enforceable. If students choose not to comply with whatever statement we've presented to them, there is very little we can do about it. We do have systems such as the AI detector built in to turn it in, but these are imperfect systems that we cannot 100% rely on. The second type of change is structural. Structural changes are those that fundamentally revise how students are evaluated. Rather than only asking them to comply with some kind of policy statement, though we should still present that statement, we change the way students interact with their assessments. Dr. Scurr provided 3 examples of structural changes. Process-based. Rather than looking at the final artifact completed at the end of the process, we evaluate the stages the learner would go through to get to that end. Personalized or contextual tasks. This could be a reflective assignment in which students consider the impact of new knowledge on their personal experience. Lived or in-class component, where students complete an assessment in the same physical space and time that their professor is present to monitor its completion. Here's a table that Dr. Scurr pulled from Corbin et al.'s journal article on this subject. In the spirit of keeping this video's length as short as possible, I won't elaborate on this, but please feel free to pause the video and consider to look at this in detail to evaluate the differences presented here between discursive and structural assessment change. Implementing change. So, let's assume we've chosen to make a change to the way we present our assessment. What then might we do? Again, Dr. Scurr has provided us with some concepts to guide our thinking, although he's careful to point out that none of these ideas are his own. So, we have 4 concepts. Cognitive offloading. Cognitive offloading is the usage of some kind of device to take on the cognitive burden associated with a particular task. A great example of this is the calculator, which we employ to ease the cognitive burden associated with complex mathematical equations. The difference between a calculator and Gen AI, however, is that you still have to have deep understanding of what's happening in mathematics to be able to make use of a calculator effectively. So you know what buttons to push and in what order. With Gen AI, though, that's not the case. What you might ask yourself then, while making a change to your assessment, if whether or not it would be okay for your students to use Gen AI for cognitive offloading and how it may or may not damage their learning. Automaticity. Automaticity is the idea that an individual has mastered a skill or some knowledge to the point that they can perform that task or recall that knowledge with no cognitive effort. An example might be a surgeon performing open heart surgery. You want that surgeon to have a high level of knowledge mastery over the anatomy of the heart. You definitely don't want your surgeon taking a moment to Google the location and appearance of the left ventricle. So, when you're redesigning your assessment, ask yourself whether the skill or knowledge your students are learning requires automaticity. The answer to that question should inform how or if Gen AI should be integrated into the assessment. Evaluative judgment. Evaluative judgment is the ability to be able to make decisions about the quality of work. It's important for people in the contemporary workforce to be able to make judgments about the quality of their own work, the work of others, and now, the work of robots. Similar to cognitive offloading, students require a fairly high-order knowledge of a topic before they can make evaluative judgments on the quality of work that Gen AI produces. So another question you might ask yourself is whether or not your students have sufficient knowledge about a topic to be able to effectively evaluate the quality of work being produced by Gen AI. Authentic assessment. An authentic assessment is an approximation of a task that our students will be expected to complete when they're employed in the workforce. It may not be exactly what's expected, it may only be a portion of a larger task, but the idea is for our students to be able to apply their knowledge and/or skill to real-life, practical tasks. When redesigning your assessment, you might explore the possibility that the task that they will perform in the industry does, in fact, make use of Gen AI. Perhaps the closest approximation of that task is to deeply integrate Gen AI into the process. Perhaps not, but it's something that we need to consider. Okay, now that we have these foundational concepts in our tool belt, let's think about how we might decide if and how we might revise our assessments. The 3+1 filters. Dr. Scurr has developed a series of filters that one might go through while they're looking to make a decision on how they might change their assessment to account for Gen AI. Throughout this section, I'll be presenting a series of filters and some associated questions to help guide your thinking. Now, of course, we shouldn't necessarily abandon and revise assessments based on answering these questions in a particular way. That would be an oversimplification. These are simply to help you get your wheels turning to think about the possibility of redesigning the way you assess a learning outcome. Abandon. The first filter is to make the decision to abandon the current approach to the assessment or not. This can be a difficult decision. If you've been using the same assessment for years and you feel passionately that it does a beautiful job of measuring your students' achievement of the learning outcomes, it can be difficult to decide that it is no longer appropriate in our contemporary learning environment. To help you make that decision, consider the following questions. Does your assessment measure low-level skills that are easily replaced by technology? Reward memorization over understanding. That is to say, does it require an unnecessary level of automaticity that wouldn't be reflected in the industry? Assess tasks that are no longer used in the industry. Allow for its completion by Gen AI with near zero student skill. Monitor. The second filter is to consider whether your students would benefit from having you observe their completion of the assessment. Perhaps observation while they work through the assessment is essential for the achievement of the learning outcomes, but perhaps it isn't. Here are some questions to think about. Are you monitoring for the sake of it? Is automaticity essential? Maybe it's important that your students can complete a task in the moment with no aids available to them. Perhaps a paramedic student is assessing a patient in a trauma situation. They need to be able to perform that task automatically. In that case, monitoring is perfectly reasonable and expected. Enhance. Should you enhance your existing assessment in such a way that you reduce its vulnerability to Gen AI? Dr. Scurr suggests that we can enhance our assessment in two ways. The first is to enhance the way in which we evaluate the assessment. A revision to the rubric. How might we do that? We might consider shifting away from policing the nature of the artifact of the assessment. We want to avoid asking if the end result of the assessment was developed by a human or not. Instead, you might consider shifting toward evaluating the process a student went through to complete the assessment, the judgment a student employed during its completion, if the student is applying the associated knowledge or skill in the appropriate context. The goal, you may have guessed, is to try our best where possible to stop trying to detect the use of AI and move towards building assessments where the usage of AI is irrelevant to achieving the outcomes. Dr. Scurr presented some examples developed by Poulsen and Sharp of the things you might consider evaluating instead of whether or not a student used AI. Keep in mind these are specific to a writing assessment, and this first list of standards is associated with the quality of writing. Again, in the spirit of reducing the length of the video, I won't explain these in detail, but feel free to pause the video here and take the time you need to read and understand them. This next set of standards is associated with the quality of the content. Finally, the +1 filter. We can enhance our assessments by adopting Gen AI. You may want to consider adopting AI and integrating it directly into the expectations of the assessment. If you choose to do that, you'll want to think about how it's integrated and how your students are expected to use it. To help you make that decision, you might think about what exactly you're looking to measure. Some examples are evaluating outputs. Are we asking our students to evaluate the quality of the content that AI produces? Again, to do that at an advanced level, they need a pretty high-level understanding of the material. Prompt quality. Are we evaluating the quality and effectiveness with which our students actually interact with AI? How detailed, how accurate, how quickly, and how close to the final product can they get through communication with the tool? Critiques with context. Can your students identify the incorrect context for a particular piece of knowledge? If you were to give them a scenario that includes mistakes or inappropriate value judgments, can they identify those errors and make corrections? Final artifact. Are we actually measuring the quality of the final product? If we were not adopting AI in the assessment, the final product matters less. If we are integrating it, then the final product matters a great deal. If you do this, you might consider splitting the evaluation into multiple sections to show their interaction with the tool and how it was produced. And that's about it, friends. I hope you found this helpful. In order to make this easier to consume in a timely fashion, I've edited a lot out of Dr. Scurr's original presentation and made some adjustments to fit our context here at Fanshawe. If you'd like to see the full hour-and-a-half presentation in its entirety, and it's worth your time, he's an excellent presenter, I've included the link to the recording of the talk in the description of this video. Thank you so much for your time. Have an amazing day.